came up with this concept, infrastructure scaling, resource consumption, it was, well, we had a problem, right? And my friend Roel helped me with the opening sentence. Everyone is known to the audience, so so the whole point of the topic, in some way, Dan, oh, here's the man, move. in some way, Dan already introduced the panel, but I want to give the topic of the panel. What I want to give is a different angle, apart from the responsibility, the moving AI from the lab to society, which in some way is, I mean, I think that it was, you showed us, you showed a slide with a farm which says no data centers, welcome here. I live 3 hours south from here. Well, even further south in Invercargill, which is literally at the end of the island, there is an economic group that are now into data centers. They made a fortune with sheep farms and long-haul trucks. And I mean, it's a, I don't know, $100 million holding or more or less, doesn't matter. The point is that now they are into data centers because it's something, I mean, these economic groups, they find a way where you can make money. Well, let's do that. It seems like a good place to do money. And it's a very good example of what you just say. I'm not saying that they know or don't know. They just look at the indicators. They look at what the analysts are saying. That links a little bit with Julian, who is not here, but I had a conversation about him being in the finance industry. So people think that it's a good deal to be in the data center business, as it was once upon a time a good deal to be in the tobacco industry. Things change. So that's the question of scaling AI responsibly. It's interesting, this question, how we define a quality metric for the AI-based solutions. I go back to a number of conversations that I had here. As a user, of course, I tried ChatGPT then because everything that I use is based on Google, so I have Gemini. Here I heard only good things about Claude. A year or two ago, one of my Multicore World speakers said, no, why don't you use Perplexity? Perplexity here. Is anyone using Perplexity or it just faded?
It's still around.
It had its quarter of hour. So, the question is, okay, how do I measure? If I need to take a decision, okay, I want to spend $20 per month or $2,000 per month or whatever, what do I choose? And that's a single user. What happens if I manage a small business but trades, I don't know, $20 million per year or whatever? How can I use that? Not to mention you then about, okay, or what Nathan said about how he used specific OpenAI. Maybe you remember the question that I asked to him. Which brings me to the point number 2 about the energy and the suppliers. That reminds me when I went to Supercomputing SC24, which was in Atlanta, and suddenly the trade show, the exhibition floor exploded. We had, I don't know, let's say 300 exhibitors normally, and suddenly from one year to other went from 300 to 400. And they came out of nowhere. Not that they were unexpected, but they were selling hydraulic pipes, cooling systems.
Yeah, the last 100 were all liquid cooling.
But that was unusual. But look, I'm a guy from the wilderness. I operate very much based on what do I read about humans. And they were absolutely out of their depth. They say, okay, what I'm doing here, I'm trying to sell, but you know that trade shows have codes. That was an interesting shock. So how are you buying? What do you expect to be presented? And finally, is anyone investing strategically? Which in some way Dan already responded his opinion. But this is an open question about how to balance let's say, societal interest versus dealing with trillion-dollar companies. It takes us back to the most simple premise in negotiation, the golden rule. The one who has the gold makes the rules. Does it apply to AI? Does it apply to infrastructure, resource, or is just a supply chain? We cannot blame COVID for supply chain scarcity these days. So this is the concept, the overall broad concept in the purpose of the panel. I will start by asking Simon, then Daisuke, then Jess, and I will leave it then to the last because we already heard enough of him.
Fair.
Simon, please.
Do you want us to tackle each of those,
I want
or?
you to speak.
In terms of scaling AI responsibly, so the mission that we have that we're funded by our government to do is really to start enabling a scale of AI that we've never been able to achieve in the UK before, and for that to really start to benefit society. So we're funded by taxpayers' money. We want AI to genuinely benefit those taxpayers and for it to be kind of obvious that they're getting benefit. So that's quite a challenge because some of this work is maybe a little bit more theoretical, a bit more sort of foundational. Some of it is a bit closer. It might be developing new drugs. We've got teams doing things like developing vaccines for dementia and things like that. So that's a bit easier to explain to sort of the general public what the benefit is. And other stuff is even closer to home where the benefit's even more obvious. So I think the sorts of missions that we're on and that we're funded to do is very much what's the benefit to society. There's lots of work on things like safe AI or responsible AI, secure AI, all those sorts of things as well, and which is an important part of it. And a word we haven't used on your slide, but I think comes under this very much, is also sovereign AI. And I mentioned this in my talk earlier in the week. And this is really about ensuring if AI, as most of us suspect, is not going to go away, even when there's a big market correction at some point, it's not going to go away. It'll still be ubiquitous. We'll end up using it all the time for lots of things. How do we make sure that we're ready for that when that happens too? So and that nobody can take that away from us. I think that's the things. I think sovereign AI is a very important.
Can I add? Just you brought that back.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that on the previous panel, but I mean the Swiss launched their own AI sovereign platform. Similar things are happening in Kazakhstan, using their own language or something like that. I'm exposed to Latin America. They just launched the Latin America large language model. I have very little exposure to that. I don't know if they are using some sort of platform or they are building it up from scratch. But again, I have the fear that it becomes just another trend because they need to respond. I just wanted to mention that to see if we can commenting around. So Simon, can you please finish or round a little bit? I'm interested on the energy part of things.
Yeah, energy for us. I wish I had Dan's energy costs. I really do. Wow. I mean, our energy costs in the UK are probably more like 35 cents a kilowatt hour.
Raise your amortization for how much you got to return.
So that's tough, but that's just what it is. If we really cared about the running cost more than anything, you'd look at outsourcing to Finland or something like that. But of course, the whole kind of sovereign AI question comes back in. There's a lot of what's going on the systems I run, Isambard. They use lots of National Health Service data, lots of information about our citizens, so we wouldn't want to go outside of the borders of the country. So we're kind of stuck with our power costs. We're doing things about that. We're actually hoping somebody wants to build 2 dedicated wind turbines right next door to our site, 2 4-megawatt wind turbines, and sell us all the power. I really hope that comes off. That will be absolutely brilliant. And the longer we can commit to them to buy that power, the cheaper that is. And actually all the power that we use today, we pay a little bit more. It's not much, it's a little bit more, to all be relatively local renewable. So all our power is sort of wind and solar and so on. So that, for us, there's actually a very realistic prospect of actually having be able to point to the renewable sources around the site, and that's where our power is coming from, and that will make it a little bit cheaper. The last thing we really want to do is reuse the waste energy as well. I think that's a big opportunity to sort of the last bit of the equation that we can really tackle. We've done about as good a job to a first order approximation on where the power comes from, how efficient the system is, and the last big piece that we can really improve is what do we do with our waste energy? Right now we throw it all away. Let's try and put it to good use. So that's the energy piece. In terms of investing strategically for the long term, again, so we're funded by the government. The government does try and take a long-term view, but governments think in the UK, in terms of parliaments. So that's a 5-year term in office. So there are lots of programs in the UK which we want to achieve this by 2030. 2030 is not an arbitrary period in time. That's the end of the current government, unless anything weird happens. So coming up with we could do this amazing thing if we can have a 10-year window. Governments will say, yeah, that's kind of interesting, and maybe we can do that. But actually, really, they're thinking, well, we need to deliver things within at most 5 years, because who knows what will happen? We may not be in power. So how much do we really care about it? And also, human beings tend to think much more short term. And if you're convincing your fellow citizens that please give us lots of money because in 10 years you'll get a big benefit, that's quite hard to convince people too. Whereas if it's in 2 or 3 years there'll be a big benefit, they'll go, okay, that seems reasonable, we'll give you a shout. So the strategic thing is actually quite tricky. I'm often quite jealous when our friends from Japan are here, and Satoshi was giving his talk earlier in the week, and they have these really nice sort of long-term plans, and they do stick to them and they come off. I think Japan's one of the countries that does this really, really well. So the UK is doing some of that, but sometimes it's hard to kind of commit longer than the current parliament in the UK.
So perfect timing for Taisuke Center.
Okay, so that I like to try.
Remember, you're doing it very well.
So I like to try to answer one by one. The first one is the most important for me. So recently, I'm always thinking about what is a validation manner, what is a good validation way to trust our AI, and also the result. And scientifically, for the scientific program, it is not so quite difficult, because we always have some answer on the scientific calculation or simulation, and so that everyone knows that. And now it is time is over to just based on the brute force computing. So the brute force computing means that they just have an FP64 simulation or something on their any machine. That is almost reaching to the limit, as well as Moore's laws and other power limitation. So I think that the most important scientific research on the next 5 years is validation of the AI result. So as I said, scientifically, it is not so big problem, because we can compare all the result of the traditional way and the new way based on the AI or AI for science. Problem is that the society problem solution given by the AI, so no one knows that the result. And also, I think that is a very complicated problem, not simple like science. So, and I have no idea, honestly saying, about the society problem responsibility by the AI, but that is the most important issue. We need to think how to validate, and the only way is just step-by-step checking the AI result and what people want and what is the condition that each nation or a region have. So, sorry, it's important, but then I have no concrete answer. The secondly, energy. So energy, the situation is completely different in any countries. And I think, personally, Japan is the most expensive energy country, and also one of the energy poor country. There are two reasons. One is that, as you know, in Japan, we had a very big tragedy in the 2011 March. Like the earthquake, and all the atomic energy were shut down at the time, because people say that in the Fukushima situation, so people said that, okay, so that as I told, the atomic energy is so dangerous, and many people have an affection of the radiation and so on. So still, it is not recovered. But another thing is that now the Japanese many companies are trying to use nature energy, especially for their mega solar energy system. But mega solar is also now becomes a problem in Japan because they break many of the woods and make a big so-called mega solar in Japan, solar energy system or a field. But that is cause another problem of for example, the reflection of the sunlight makes a big damage on the surrounding area. So there is no free lunch about the energy. Of course, energy is not free, and now government, after the earthquake in past 10 years, government returned to the fossil energy, but it is of course limited and not good for the pollution. I don't know that maybe that everyone in the world thinks that fossil fuel is very bad, except that President Trump. Okay,
but U.S. is all for it right now. Yeah.
So what am I saying? That
You're from Texas, right?
Yeah.
So we need to think about new energy source, but actually there is no new energy source. So only one thing is that how to control a good balance between the older industry and science to how to distribute the energy. So there is no perfect answer. Third one is that I have really truly no answer, but because Japanese government is one of the very poor government to think about a long-term strategy. So that they just think about 10 years later or something, and always catching up that something that's strategically done in the United States or EU, although the situation is different. And Japan is not so big country compared with that our energy consumption or something. And also, AI engine in Japan is still not so rich. So we know that Amazon or Google makes a really big engine for the AI, and these AI engines are much, much larger compared with our supercomputers or even their DOE supercomputers. So that once I heard about what these guys are making the supercomputers, it is just one digit different size of our supercomputers. So in Japan, we have at least one big machine, like a Fugaku or something. So next one is probably good for the AI, but Japanese government want to put everything in that machine. It is completely wrong because the power of the machine is not comparable with the Genesis missions machines, maybe more than one digit of the difference. So I really think that in the past 100 to 500 years, the Japanese government is not so good at for the long-term strategy. That is also not exceptional on the AI strategy and so on. So honestly saying, I'm very pessimistic about these issues as long as I'm living in Japan. But I cannot live more than 20 years from now, so I don't care.
Oh, you're always welcome in New Zealand. Jess,
All right.
give us some hope.
Yeah, well, it was interesting to hear Dan's talk, and I think Dan, just looking at the numbers you were talking about there, it's a bit like whenever I come to these conferences and you hear you guys talk about your big machines and think, man, it'd be great to have these big numbers. Maybe now you know how I feel. I think that's actually the issue. I mean, I kind of come back to your point that you were making that in this market we are price takers. And so I think there's sort of a question for me around are there some better ways for data centers and things to roll out? Well, they're going to roll out according to the market because that's the most effective use for the power. It's the most effective use for the land. We're going to have a whole bunch of people kind of go and do that. Whether it's the best use is kind of it's not something that we can really influence very well. And I think I guess the kind of the things that I start to think about is how do we respond to this, right? It's easy, I think, in these kind of situations to sort of sit here and go, what does this mean for coders? What does this mean for scientists? I guess the thing that I worry about is, what does it mean for like mechanics and plumbers and the people on the street? And that's I think that's when you start to see those signs crop up that say, get the data center off my lawn. It's not because the data center is there and consuming power, it's because what used to be there was a car, production plant or something like that. And so I'm kind of reminded of, I've got my Rocket Lab t-shirt on today. I'm reminded of when I went through Rocket Lab and talked to the guys on the floor that were building these engines. And they were panel beaters. They were guys that built cars, before they worked for Sir Peter Beck. And now here they are building rockets that go around the backside of the moon and off to Mars, And I think there's something really powerful about that. So I think we're going to see all this disruption, but I think what we have to really think is like, as a nation and a society, how are we making those other opportunities that people are going to move to as AI kind of takes a bunch of those jobs. So I think the key metric for me is what are those new opportunities? How are we creating those new opportunities, and are we doing that faster than the opportunities that are disappearing? Yeah, OpenStar, another fantastic piece of New Zealand startup research. They're building a fusion lab in the Hutt Valley, which is amazing work that they're doing there. It's come out of the Robinson Research Institute. So I think the innovation is kind of really key, and the thing that worries me most about the massive spikes in the market that we're seeing is it squashes a bunch of that innovation. To Dan's point, we need a Beowulf cluster moment, and yet this is the time in which we're going to be squeezing scientists out of using these resources because they can't get enough GPUs or they can't get access to these kind of things. So that worries me a wee bit. I guess on the energy thing, New Zealand has a very, very deregulated energy market, possibly second only to Texas, I think, in terms of kind of efficient use of energy, that we've sort of been set up really well for that. The challenge that you get into is there's no slack left in the market at all. And I think there's a few things that are interesting about some of these data centers cropping up. I talked to CDC, who host our computer, and they're sort of, getting some quite interesting financing of energy infrastructure that wouldn't otherwise get off the ground because now they've got a really big usage for it. So there's investments in geothermal in the North Island that are now happening because some of the hyperscalers are coming in and saying we're going to need this baseload development. There's even investments in things like capturing methane off landfill, which has the double whammy of now I'm producing energy and I'm also reducing emissions to the environment. So those kind of things with this amount of money sloshing around the system actually become possible as well. So there's kind of good things that come out of that. I think the bad things that are going to come out of that is an increased reliance on things like solar, like wind, and actually they're intermittent. And so do we end up with power grid instability? And again, back to what does this mean for the man on the street? They're not going to be pissed off until they turn on the switch and the lights don't come on. So I think that's really challenging. And I guess kind of just in terms of the what does strategic investment look like? And it is really, really hard to sort of, how do we kind of invest strategically when we're dealing with trillion-dollar companies? I think, New Zealand's always been about finding the niche. And I think the opportunity when you have these huge swings in the market, these huge swings in technology, is to really identify those opportunities where things are being commodified and make good investments off that. That's what drove AWS, was that identification that servers had gone from being something I paid for and had on-prem to something that everyone wanted, and there's a whole bunch of undifferentiated heavy lifting, and they made a stack of cash off it, right? I think what we're seeing with these AI tools, whether that's AI in science, whether it's LLMs, AI for coding, is we're seeing a commodification of a whole bunch of things that previously were really expensive. So there's opportunity in that, and eventually we will get to the point where AI is too cheap to meter. It's just a commodity and something that's kind of baked in.
So what are you saying is that we don't even bother to have a quality metric? We just wait until...
Well, I mean, it's. I guess I'm trying to say it's not.
It'll all be free.
Yeah. I don't know what the. Well, I don't know what the alternative is. I don't. What is the alternative here? If we are genuinely price takers with those kind of numbers that we're seeing. So I might pass to Dan there because that was sort of just wrapping around in my head after his talk.
Yeah, I do love the theory that if we spend enough money, it'll all be free. On this stuff is the current thing that's being. Even the Elon Musks of the world are throwing out there, but it's like you're forgetting the rent cost, right? Yeah, the production cost of a token might be free. That's not what they're going to sell it for if they own it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because they need to continue. He has $1 trillion bonus to make, which was not factored into my cost model. So let me make sort of three of my usual meandering points here. But first, the data centers get off my lawn thing. If you are the kind of person who has the mental fortitude to scan US headlines on a daily basis and happen to look today, Meta didn't really announce, maybe it leaked, that they're spending $65 million in the current election cycle to push back on the no data centers movement and find AI data center friendly politicians to run in local elections. So, I can't imagine that corporate interference at that scale on an election would ever tip the balance in the US. It's never happened before. I'm maybe out of good points, but the sarcasm continues. So, so $65 million is the published spend on what they're going to spend on this election cycle to try and push back on this data center notion. So it may not change the facts, but it might very much change the perception doing that. But skip down to energy for a minute. This is one of the places where these kinds of companies at this scale, who aren't price sensitive, can actually really shake up the industry in a positive way, because the energy industry is huge, but also fairly entrenched, right? And there's big players, there's a lot of semi-monopoly, there's a lot of regulation around grids, and things don't change, right? How many decades have we been talking about smart grid or grid investment and infrastructure? How long have we been talking about integrating storage into the grid, and none of it ever happens, right? How many years, fusion has been, the joke for my entire career has been, the energy of tomorrow, now and forever. It's 30 years away for the last 30 years. But maybe this is the thing that actually moves it, is we have these companies who are willing to throw billions of dollars at it and potentially lose billions of dollars to get things to happen right now. And it could be where we get the sort of change we need in power systems and power grids that just wasn't going to happen the way the markets were set up before. Yep. And that is sort of the opportunity that happens in this wild disruption. And I was on a panel last week, actually, for the Texas Power Grid, ERCOT, the grid reliability entity, that sort of regulates power in Texas, and saying, look, they want the power now, right? I don't care what your process is for connect. There's the number of projects waiting to connect to the grid. Large-scale generation projects went from 300 in 2015 to 3,000 last year. So they have like a 7-year backlog of getting things put on the grid for even production side things at the moment, because of this huge demand for new power. And they're like, they don't care what your processes are. You either adapt or they'll just go around you the kind of money you have and build data centers not connected to the grid. That's totally fine to them, right? And you see the nuclear industry driven by that, the small modular reactor industry being driven. It's entirely driven by AI data centers at this point. And those things have been out there as ideas for a long time and not moving, right? But this is going to be the thing that maybe makes them commercially viable. And it, that could be a huge positive out of what happens, right? And I think, and my point to the ERCOT people was, well, look, I'm not going to build storage. And if you want the data center, because there's a huge demand in Texas with the weather swings, et cetera, to have variable load, right? And they mean variable in 50 milliseconds, right? We have a power shortage. Take your gigawatt of load and make it disappear in 50 milliseconds, or ramp up in 50 milliseconds to absorb the swings in renewables and stuff like that. And I'm like, given the price of GPUs, nobody's turning off the data center for a hard crash, right? But you might convince me to put in cogeneration or batteries, but as a federally funded entity, I'm not going to do it because I feel like it. I'm going to do it because you've given me a cost incentive or a regulation that makes me do it, and say, if you're going to build a data center bigger than 50 megawatts, you have to be able to disconnect from the grid for 12 hours, right, and run on your own power. Or if you build in the capacity to be a variable load, we'll give you a 15% discount on power. And it'll happen, right, at the scale that they're spending money on this. Yeah. And one of the grid people pushed back, and they're like, well, if you want this kind of flexibility, you want this kind of speed and connectivity, you'd have to pay 30% more per megawatt. And I said, if you told Microsoft that they could have a gigawatt on the Texas power grid tomorrow and they had to pay 30% more for it, they would sign up before you hung up the phone, right? There would be no debate, no decision, right? Because again, if they had to come to the UK to get power, they're going to pay 5 times as much anyway, right? And they're going wherever in the world they can get power. So And they were like, well, you'd have to pay like 30% more. That's outrageous. And I'm like, no, it's not. They don't care. You don't understand how small the power bill is compared to the cost of the
So
machine.
essentially then you are responding the last part of the third question. So how do you balance the regional interests with the trillion-dollar companies? You just don't.
Well, that's it. I mean, people respond to incentives. Arguably, the role of government is to set the incentives in the market up to act in the societal interest. So,
That's right.
Well, I'm tempted to say, no, it's you. Panel. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, there was something I forgot to say about this organisation that wants to build these wind turbines right next to us. They're actually a non-profit organisation, and they've already built some of these around the cities. This is not a pie-in-the-sky idea. They've already done it. They've already built multiple 4-megawatt wind turbines, and the money they get selling the energy, they use to invest in the local area where the wind turbines have been built. Mm-hmm. And they will put solar panels on people's roofs. They will improve the insulation of homes. So the local community that gives permission for these wind turbines then directly benefits from the money that those wind turbines generate, which is absolutely brilliant. So this is what they want to do again next to us. They want to sell us the power, and the money we give them, they will then spend in the local community around us, around our site, bringing all those benefits, which is really cool. So if we get this right, we can actually be a really good neighbour. And it's not just about you might benefit from a vaccine for dementia in 10 years' time because of something that runs on Isambard today. It could be somebody will give you money to put solar panels on your roof because of Isambard paying for its power today. Oh, and by the way, we can also give you really cheap, completely green heating. We can heat your home as well. So you kind of want to be near us at that point if we can get this right. We're not thinking about it purely commercially. We're thinking about this in terms of the overall, what's the benefit to society?
Sounds very socialist, but at the end of the day, it's just the Bank of Dave. But which brings me to, I will make a political statement. We are living the Trump era, for better or worse, and I am not making a judgment. It's an extraordinary era, which means that it's not ordinary. And the point that happens, and that's a message that we non-living in America get, is that, okay, if you are stronger, you have more power. It's not that there is rule of law or not, but if you come with the power of your economic position, you can do exactly as you describe. I mean, Microsoft comes and does this and that. And you can be comfortable or not, but the question is we, and by we I mean this room, this community, we're supposed to be the clever ones. Do we have actual, not reactions in terms of, we need to stand for this and that, but say, no, wait a minute, this power decision, by powerful I mean, is actually not a good business decision. It sounds like a good business decision this short time, but in the midterm, so are you looking in the interest of your shareholders, or are you looking just in an immediate response, an immediate solution? So my point is, when I say the Trump era, I also include TikTok, I also include immediate response. I feel that we are missing, the single fact that Anthropic was founded in 4 years ago, 6, and is going for potentially the largest IPO or second largest IPO in the history of mankind. Certain numbers are just hard for us as humans to manage or digest or comprehend. Don't we have a responsibility on that? And if we do, are we doing anything? And if we have, do we have anything potentially a part of just saying things in a panel that is not going very further? It's a totally personal comment, but I want to see if there is any comment on that. Jess, you work for my government.
I don't know.
Yeah, on behalf of the New Zealand government, what would you like to say?
Okay, I'm not representing the New Zealand government. We're not a government agency. Yeah, look, I don't know. I don't know how we respond to these things. What I would say is governments are not powerless. They have the power to set the rules of the game, and we have, I guess, as a society, the ability to tell our governments what we want those rules to be. Sometimes that doesn't get heard, and sometimes it does, I guess. And I think one of the things that we do need to be thinking about is kind of what can we be doing in terms of providing our expertise to those people that are in government, making those decisions about how they set those rules. I know it's always one of those really hard things to engage with government officials and ministers and send in letters and provide the kind of expertise that we have in these kind of rooms to say, well, hey, this is how you can usefully think about what's going on in the energy system. This is how you can usefully think about the numbers, these stupid numbers that are coming out from Anthropic. I'd love to put Dan in front of our Minister for Science and Innovation and say, look, this is what it looks like.
Hasn't gone real well in the US.
Yeah. But it's this ability to communicate what is quite a hard and technical topic, and at some point ends up being about what's my NV72 chip actually laid out like, but actually it has implications on society. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of those things that we don't do great as a community of experts or nerds or whatever you want to call us. We could be doing a better job of explaining where some of those levers are.
So we are price takers in one way.
Yeah, exactly. But I think kind of helping people to understand where those little levers are that can actually shift things in a better direction. And so being able to do that better is something we could do.
Boku-san, we have a different culture in Japan, because at the end of the day, the panel, it's diverse, but there are all Western except you.
Yeah. So that first, I cannot tell anything on behalf of the Japanese government because I'm Korean, actually. I was born in Japan, but I'm still the Korean. Stop being joking. So that always thinking that, as I told, that the long-term strategy is one of the very, very poor things for the Japanese, not my government, but the Japanese government. And so that, again, for example, the supercomputing is totally different from what the DOE doing. And also that we always think that we are in some small eel. There is a famous word, and a frog in the eel doesn't know about the sea. Mm-hmm. And that always having, maybe not just in Japan, but also in the many of the Asian, except the Chinese. So China is always watching the world, and while the Korean, the Japanese, and even the Singaporeans, and they think that always in a small region. So I always think that we need to have more wide eyes about a long-term strategy, or not just the politics, but think about society. So I'm just still learning from all the Western countries. And that is not just for me, but most of the Japanese think. So actually, of this the panel discussion, it is really different from what we are usually thinking. So sorry, but I cannot tell nothing further more productive.
It's any concluding remarks from the panelists that you want to share with us? Unless there is a exceptionally request. Someone wants to ask something from the floor, or we just allow?
Yeah, that's a good question.
So, give us a message of hope, Simon.
I think it can be a message of hope. Yeah, there's a lot of really positive potential in AI in general. When we all think of AI, we tend to think of all the big commercial things that are going on. And that has lots of really positive potential, but also lots of negative stuff as well. But fundamentally, there's a lot of real promise in AI, and if we get it right, it should be a broadly positive contribution to society, like the internet has been, like computers have been, like electricity, like steam power. All of these things, they all come with some challenges, but broadly they can help move us forward. So that's what we're working towards.
And Jess or Dan, concluding remarks?
After you, Dan.
Okay. I wanted to talk more about metrics. That's a horrible concluding remark, because there's never any good things to say about it. So changing gears and to sort of merge what Simon was saying with the previous discussion about our responsibility, right? As always, we face a lot of really hard problems. AI might be the solution to some of those problems. Done well from even in areas like climate, if we can evolve it in the right ways. But it comes with a host of challenges, and the world has always faced these sort of complex challenges. And sort of the responsibility, whether we talk about individuals, governments, societies, or the planet as a whole, is sort of how we approach these. And one of the things that drives me nuts about the current situation in the US is we're not having good, rational discussions about, and instead having ideologically charged discussions about how we might approach these problems, right? This could be the opportunity to modernize the power grids and to decarbonize power, and to discover new materials for power, right? And this could be the opportunity to solve many of our food and related problems through, improved AI for agriculture, stuff like that. There are so many of those challenges where you see that if we could organize politically to, create the will to solve these problems, we probably have the technology and the tools and the financial resources to do it. If we can spend, $1 trillion to curate cat videos appropriately and make artificially generated cat videos appropriately, imagine if we took that and directed it into something that mattered. But it's our, and believe it or not, I actually am a free market capitalist, but it's the role of the government, and it's our role as citizens to encourage the government to create markets that are set up for success with the right incentives to align with societal goals. Right? And if we said, if we laid ground rules for how to build data centers that, had water quality pieces and the things that are healthy for the grid and incentives to decarbonize power with it, we could build a giant AI infrastructure that solves a lot of problems, and we could do it in a responsible way. If we just, take a laissez-faire attitude of the only goal is to extract money from it, and we're not going to put any other guardrails on the market, we're probably doomed to failure. So, but all we lack to solve most of these challenges is the ability to create, to organize, to create the political will to solve them. We've done amazing things through government investments in the long term. If we can get to the moon, we can figure out how to build a data center.
So Jess, give us a conclusion.
Oh, sorry. May I talk first?
Oh, yeah, you said that you said
Sorry, Jess.
You go.
Because you will be the end, I think. So that, and it is another story, but from my young age, I always thought that what will come at first out of three things. One is a nuclear fusion. Second one is a quantum computer. And third one is AI singularity. So I was really curious that maybe these three will never come while I'm living, okay? But in my viewpoint, nuclear fusion is still a little bit far away because there's a lot of problem of the practical. Even the AI is now supporting some research of the nuclear fusion, but still it's far. The second, quantum computer looks like very close, but I think personally, still it is not a good solution as for the applying them a lot of the various problems. The third one is the AI singularity. So that what AI looks like great today is that in past 5 years, the AI's improvement is tremendously high. So people are really they're surprised by the generative AI. Generative AI is very clever, or generative AI looks like very clever. So that's the difference, clever and looks like clever. And so that, as I told, the Japan is still they're poor for their resources, even the AI and even for their electricity. But today's AI's improvement is not personally. I think maybe the people think that find out that some limit of the AI. So AI infrastructure is so important, and still Japan is a little bit poor. But so that what I want to say is that we need to validate the AI solution. Really important. That the most important issues, I think, the validation of any result of the AI, and that is. And even today's, there are some other topics that maybe the white-collar researchers will not need it replaced by the AI. But that is one of the final things, issues we have to research how to validate the AI. That's it.
Okay, in that context, Jess, 1 minute message of hope about why New Zealand has the global responsibility to lead the world in this crusade.
Oh God, no, I don't have that. Sorry, I'm going to let you down. Look, I think it's quite easy to get depressed about looking at the immediate bubble and how shit it is and all of the crap things that are going on. But I think out of all of these things, there's always more innovation that comes out, and it's always from the small areas where you don't expect it. And I think if there's one thing that kind of the development of AI has shown us is that we're really, really poor at predicting the future and poor at predicting how technologies are going to roll out. And I mean, I sort of, again, this for me kind of comes back to my talk last year, which is sort of small is beautiful. That's where the innovation starts and that's where it grows. And I think what AI is doing is it will democratize access to a bunch of skills and things that previously you had to have a university degree or a PhD or God forbid, 30 years worth of HPC experience to tap into. And now I can go and buy this commercially, from a data center on the market and get a really, really good product there. And so the thing that kind of comes back for me is like, how does this empower the citizen scientists that are just trying to look at the health of the ape and can now use LLM agents to kind of build themselves a real quick, dashboard app that actually elevates these things to the general public. Those kind of little things they're not trillions of dollars, they're not, big grand challenges like solving fusion or general AI, but they are going to make our life better. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of excited for that, actually. So here's to creative destruction. Here's to Microsoft burning trillions of dollars on OpenAI, and good luck to them. We're going to get some good shit out of it, and that excites me, I think.
So you quoted Schumpeter. So let's join me thanking the panel.